Hello everyone and welcome to the Lancashire Innovation Festival and to our last session of our digital day here at Fraser House in Lancaster. My name is Maya Ellis and I'm going to be hosting a fireside chat with Kothia and Michael Gibson to talk about Lancashire's digital economy. So first of all, before we crack on with hopefully a very exciting discussion, we've been working really hard over the last few months to build up the story of digital across Lancashire, and we are really delighted to announce today a new report that we've published, which is the Lancashire Digital Economy Report 2021, which will be telling the story of all our different subsectors within the digital economy across Lancashire. That is now live on the Invest in Lancashire website, so do go and take a look and do start sharing it with partners far and wide. It's something we've been building up to for a long time to try and make sure that we promote the story of the digital sector across Lancashire as much as we possibly can, and there's much more plans to come on that. So without further ado, I would love to hear from both our guests today, and just to start with, maybe tell us a little bit about your background and who you are. Cam, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Mary. So I'm Cam Kothia, Director of eBusiness UK, a business based in Blackburn in Lancashire. And my involvement with the digital tech sector actually started 40 years ago. I know I don't look old enough, but that's the truth. When I was at school, graduated with a degree in electrical and electronics engineering, and then from then on worked for a telecoms company, coming out with a degree in electronics, I actually joined the sales and marketing department of the telecoms company, which was amazing because it took me to parts of the world that I would have never ever dreamt of going to in my mid-20s. And then it took me to exotic places like India, parts of Africa, Nigeria, Algeria, South Africa, amazing places. Journey carried on, then came back to Lancashire and worked for a company called Telewest Communications. In the early 90s, I set up their business services division. So grew that from a blank sheet of paper to around a 15 million turnover in around 4 or 5 years. Left the company, went down to London, and then set up a company. Believe it or not, I set up a network, a telemedicine network. That was back in 1997. So it was taking patient cases from the Middle East and sending them to the specialist centres in London. But 1997 I'm talking about, way before its time. So it didn't quite work out, and then I came back to Blackburn and set up eBusiness UK, and that was 1997, so over 20 years ago. So that's what we've been doing ever since. We have two sides of the business. One is what you might call a digital agency. Our main focus is search engine marketing and web design and development. And then we have another arm to the business, which is actually a pure play online retail business, where we market smart home devices. And these are mainly security cameras, indoor, outdoor, doorbells, floodlight cameras and stuff like that. But they're all controlled from your smartphone. So very, very involved in tech, pretty much all my working life.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Michael?
Well, I'm pleased to be following the godfather of Lancashire Digital, because everybody kind of follows on from Cam, and if they didn't, they followed on from a couple of people in Lancaster who've been around for decades as well. Probably my first big step into the world of digital and the internet was the launch publisher of Internet World magazine, the first internet business publication back in 1999. It kind of exposed me to the crazy world of the internet when VCs were pouring money into it then, and it was all really exciting. I didn't do much with it then. I probably, there was my opportunity to realise the future of the internet and didn't do that much with it really. So ended up coming back to Lancaster, kind of sick and tired of London and wanted to come back home and do something here, and excited about the future really. And founded, with a bunch of guys who'd already created a company called Fat Media. About a year after they started, they invited me to come on board as their MD and gave me shares, and we built that up from a little tiny company and upstairs in a rickety building to 68 staff before we sold it about 6 years ago, and built up some great clients, and there's amazing people who went in that business who've now gone on to do setting up their own companies, doing different things, so really exciting. And then I with my business partner Will Maiden, we set up another company called Moralis, focused on basically how do we reduce carbon emissions in transport and developing products around that. And Will had already had loads of experience, and obviously had experience on the kind of product side and evolution of kind of how we can make all these kind of digital platforms. He had the kind of algorithmic knowledge, and we've since built that up now. We're about 27 staff based here at Fraser House.
Amazing, thank you. And so one of the reasons I guess we were keen for both of you to be here today is you both played quite bigger roles in the evolution of the digital sector in Lancashire. So Michael, you were one of the founders of Lancashire Digital Lancashire, sorry. And Cam, you are currently the chair of the digital sector group of the Lancashire LEP. Can you tell me a little bit about Lancashire itself? And you're obviously very passionate about digital sector in Lancashire, having had those roles. What role has Lancashire played in developing your businesses, and how important has it been?
Okay. So when I came back to Blackburn, one of the drivers for me was, so the question in my head was, do I stay in London or do I go back to Lancashire? And it wasn't difficult, really. And I'll tell you why, because when I came back to Blackburn, we got some offices, and from home to my office was 10 minutes. And the equivalent in London was probably about 45 minutes to an hour. So it was quite an easy decision, but that wasn't the main driver. For me, when we set up the business, there was a number of things. So there was myself and my brother, who actually has he has a degree in electronics. So he's more techie than I am. So the two of us got together and said, okay, well, we need, we can actually set up our own business now. So we then said, okay, well, where? Well, Blackburn's home, so it was a no-brainer there as well. But the support that we actually got from the local authority, and also in those days there was the business links, and so at that time there was East Lancashire and West, two separate business links. But the support we got from them allowed us to get some decent office space. In terms of we started with just the two of us. Neither of us were web designers, and we went into the web design business, which is quite ironic, but we actually then took on our first member of staff, which was the web, to do the web design. But I found that the main driver was the fact that it was home, great place to start a business. You've got the seaside on your doorstep, you've got the lakes just up the road, you've got fantastic countryside just around you. Why would I want to be anywhere else? And so not very technically focused answer there, but that was the reality.
That was the reality, yeah. Nice.
In terms of participating in the Lancashire digital economy, I think the one thing that Cam and I both agree on is that a mayor is incredibly good at arm twisting. She's phenomenally good at getting people on board and keeping them enthused and doing things, and maybe taking some time that it might not otherwise had. She magically finds it. And there are a lot of other people actually across the county who are very good at that as well. I think, though, from a personal perspective, I've always been really passionate about the places I live, and I want to contribute. And I think it's vital, if you've got the knowledge and experience and those kind of things, that you can contribute and add something to it, then try. And there's a lot of people who won't sacrifice the time, but it's worth it, because you're not going to necessarily gain a huge amount personally or for your business, but you are going to see the fruits of your success. So I was immensely proud that with some of the work that I did with Digital Lancashire, one of the things was that Lancaster's really important to me, because the amount of companies, and I've seen people grow as friends and colleagues and set up their own businesses here, and wanted to see things thrive, and similarly around the county too. So, but we just didn't have the space, we didn't have the opportunity to do it. So creating the report that acknowledged how what the problem was with office space was both in Lancaster and around the county, and then getting people to come out and actually see that for themselves, and then finally getting this magical investment into Fraser House as a starting point, I hope, for so much more. People started to really realise the value of the digital economy, and I think that's something that I, Cam and others can all take great pride in, that we've put the flag in the ground and made sure that people are aware of actually what fantastic things go on here, so that people like Mayor and others can take that forward in their roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing you've really highlighted there is how important storytelling is, and how important sort of getting the message out there is. Obviously, the new report that we're kind of publishing today is very much to try and build on that and build on that story. I know you've both been instrumental in sort of feeding into this and some of your thoughts on this. Is there anything key that you've kind of seen come out of it that you're that's kind of your, your favourite stat or fact or whatever that's coming out around the Lancashire economy that you're keen that we kind of promote?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about storytelling, and this document has actually captured pretty much all the positive things that are going on in and around Lancashire. Now, why is this important? You've got places like this, Fraser House, which I know both of you had, have been instrumental in getting together. But if you think about the rest of Lancashire, and yes, there are some amazing things like in Chorley, for example. There's some great stuff happening there in Burnley. But if you put some context into it, I was reading last week, I think one of the ministers did a speech where he said, in the first 6 months of this year, tech digital businesses have managed to secure £13.5 billion of investment in the UK. That's during a pandemic, and that's phenomenal. Now you sort of say, okay, well, the bulk of that is actually going to go to London and the South, and it's a fact of life, sadly. But a good chunk of that actually comes to the Northwest, and we're in Lancashire, the second largest economy in the Northwest, but we're not attracting that level of digital and tech investment. So when you've got a document like this that said, look, actually, have a look at Lancashire, we are actually really, really good. We've got some fantastic universities, we've got some fantastic businesses. That I think this allows us to shout loud about who we are and what we are. And Michael's a business mirrorless. Personally, I want to see dozens and dozens of those kind of businesses. And so in terms of what this does, I think this is a first step of the process to say, well, we're as good as anybody else, and the digital economy in Lancashire is buzzing, thriving, and the announcements yesterday and formally today, I think will actually act as a catalyst to drive that quite seriously. So I think these are exciting times, and we're on the cusp of something really, really huge in Lancashire as far as digital economy is concerned.
Definitely, and I guess just to put a bit of flesh on that, obviously we've had some announcements over the last couple of weeks. I think so. Preston is now the leading sort of growing technology capital of the UK in terms of salaries, in terms of growth there, and also just the recent announcement yesterday around a £5 billion investment in the new base for the Cyberforce Centre in Samlesbury. Michael, do you think those are they going to lead the economy now, or do you think there's other things that have been bubbling under the surface that are just as important?
I'm not going to be controversial about Preston, but Preston started from a low base. Look at wonderful Lancaster as well. So don't forget these other places. Burnley was the fastest growing tech sector in the UK 3 years ago as well. So it's happening all across the county. There's phenomenal stories going on here. And people need to find them out. And what the report does, and what things like the Tech Nation report emphasises, is that digital is the fastest growing sector in the UK, that if you work in digital, you earn significantly more than the national average, and it's a far more productive sector than almost any other. So if you want to impact the economy, then digital's the place to be. I think what we need to emphasise, though, is that large landmark investments from government can create opportunity and do different things. But what the report does as well is also recognise, like you said, those stories. And if you think about people who've built and grown businesses, I mean today EKM, who were on talk about e-commerce today, sold their business this morning. That's a landmark for the owners, but it should be a landmark for everybody else as well. That's something we can all celebrate, because it wasn't just those people, it was all the Prestonians and Lancashire people who built that fantastic business. And the fact that it's been bought from somebody outside the region doesn't necessarily mean that anything will change. Hopefully it will grow even further. But what we've seen is the owners of Circle Loop and Mission Labs sell that business for about 40 million, based in Rawtenstall. We've seen Empirical here at White Cross do this, sell to a Swedish company. And these are things to celebrate. We've got a huge amount of, and those kind of things get into the news. But with so many fantastic stories to tell here. And I think that's what this does, is really set out a foundation for that and flags that up. But we can do so much more. We can actually celebrate businesses that aren't selling. We can just sell them at what great, amazing things they're doing. And there are so many of those stories that we can shine a light on, not only just those businesses, but also the places in which they operate as well.
Definitely. So just bringing that back a bit more internally to Lancashire, and sort of, I guess, now thinking about the businesses that we have here, what would you say, to Lancashire businesses who are based here? You two have obviously had great success with your businesses so far. How can other digital businesses, or any businesses who are wanting, arguably most businesses are digital these days, how can digital businesses help themselves in this county, and where do they go for support? What did you do, and what are your best tips for those growing businesses?
I think it's a case of, there's so many ingredients to doing this kind of thing. A lot of it rests with yourself, because you've got to have the faith and trust and the confidence to actually go out and have the right ideas to go and do this. But as you're going along, you're going to need that level of support. And there is great work going in Lancashire, and I think that we can only do more of it. So we always know that Lancashire has been traditionally, in terms of the digital sector, behind the likes of London, etc., where the venture capitalists are, where all these things are. And it's that combination that we're gradually and significantly improving. So in terms of capital, a lot more of the private equity companies, VCs, angel investors are looking at now at the Northwest that they certainly weren't before. In terms of skills, we've got the brilliant work that Kerry Harrison and the team are doing at the Digital Skills Partnership to actually acknowledge and understand what the skills needs are of the county, and actually how we can improve on that. So those are resources we can tap into. There's a load of things like government grants which are available for things like innovation and specific sectors, and people aren't traditionally tapped into them. You can see the numbers are really poor, like London, Cambridge, Oxford, those kind of areas really suck up that money. And gradually that's moving our way, and we can do more as businesses to support each other in learning how to bid and win and get all that kind of income. We can do more in terms of, and what we're doing it is around things like infrastructure, that we have great buildings, that we have things like gigabit fibre that help our businesses and progress. And it's tapping into that, and it's finding things that are really important, like mentoring. Go to the growth hub, the boost within Lancashire. Find mentoring through that, find mentoring support through other sources as well. European Enterprise Network with members around here. And you can tap onto all these kind of things, and you'll only discover them sometimes if you go out and meet people and talk to people. And that's one of the really vital things about this place and a festival like this, is that we're talking to each other, engaging with each other. And the more of that we do, the more successful we'll become, I think.
Brilliant. Cam, your top tips?
Yeah, just to what Michael's saying in terms of the support that's available, there is a huge amount of support. Having said that, I think there is still probably education or training is probably the right term in terms of getting potential businesses or startup businesses or scaling up businesses the right skills to allow them to be successful. So Michael talked about the various grants that are available. Now, unless you've been there and done it, filling out those forms can be quite a challenge. So when we talk about the digital sectors, so organisation like Boost, for example, do a phenomenal job for startups, but there may need to be a digital flavour to that, to say, okay, well, what are the specific needs of these kind of businesses? So if we're talking about capitalising on the potential, let's just say the investment in Cyberforce, £5 billion, that is phenomenal. Now, okay, that's earmarked for a particular purpose, but there'll be so many benefits to other businesses, both digital and non-digital, around that. The question is how, if you're a business with an idea, and you could be somebody at university, you could be doing some research, or just some kind of soft innovation where you find a new way of doing something, then where do you go? Okay, so the natural place is Boost, but then does Boost offer the very specific skills such as grant applications or even applying for seed funding? I think in Lancashire we have all the skills that we need. We probably need to point them all in the same direction and bring them together, maybe under one kind of umbrella that says, okay, that's your one-stop shop if you want to start and grow a digital business.
Definitely, and I know that interestingly Graham Baldwin this morning, as the chair of the Lancashire Innovation Board, was talking about some of the work that board is trying to push at the moment, and potentially looking at kind of an online platform or something that pulls a lot of that together. And I think there feels like now there's a lot of momentum in a lot of those spaces. There's an understanding that's needed, and thankfully more resource going into pulling it together. But you're right, a lot of the need is just kind of focusing it a bit more and giving people a space to go. I guess just building on that then, there's lots of kind of bigger institutions across both Lancashire, also local government, central government bodies. What would be your plea to them? What's the thing that you're kind of lobbying for, that you most think we need to see from them in the next sort of 5 years?
Okay. As far as the digital sector is concerned, as Michael said earlier, there is a lot of realization's probably a bit strong, but it's one of the fastest growing sectors in the UK. And in Lancashire, we have a lot of latent potential. And I genuinely mean this, that there is a huge, you see from this, a huge potential, but not capitalised yet. So the plea to the movers and shakers in Lancashire is to say, okay, we talked about pulling things together, and if we can understand the potential and overlay that with the investment that was announced over the weekend and today, £5 billion in cybersecurity, then that potential almost doubles and triples, if not a hell of a lot more than that. Right? So what the movers and shakers now need to do, and that includes people like Michael, yourself, and say, okay, well, what do we do now? Is say, okay, let's have a coherent action plan that capitalises on that, because I know we were talking earlier about Media City a few years ago in Manchester, when BBC came along and made their, I think you said it was £1 billion, which is a fifth of what's being invested in Lancashire. And look what happened to Manchester. So we can probably accelerate their journey, learn from them, good, bad and the ugly, and let's put our action plan in place that allow us to realise this potential that we know we've got.
Definitely. So it's an exciting prospect, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, while the government, we can expect to try and get the government, the levelling up agenda, trying to say, well, you need to invest in the northwest. There's been certain achievements in things like the northeast where a lot of the money seems to be being spent. Being honest, I think we've got to, while we need more money and need more resource, local authorities and others to try and push economic development, we do need to work together to actually say, it's the emphasis is on us, not the government, to try and put the funds in or drive it forward. If we've got the capability here, we've got the imagination, then let's get it out there. I think we're on a virtuous circle, as in we started a few years ago, there was hardly any resource. Now, the level of things like the Innovation Board and the work that the county is doing is fantastic, but we've still got a long way to go. And I think we've always got to constantly set our bar higher and ambitions higher, talk becomes action, and it has to be that way. Boris Johnson talked about a cyber corridor coming from Lancaster to Manchester. Well, let's make it a reality. Let's try and draw all these things together. Let's make Lancaster, then Preston with Samlesbury and the other things that are there. So Lancashire is a world leader in cybersecurity. How do we make that a reality? And there's so many other things we can do in terms of place marketing initiatives and ideas to try and push this further forward, clustering, all these kind of things that we talk about a great deal, just now need to switch into reality and bring all these kind of things together, because the opportunity is there. I mean, it really is, the opportunity is there to scale up, grow our whole economy rather than just simply some of the businesses that are here.
So I was just going to say, Michael touched on probably the most important element to all of this, which is funding. And if we look around and say, okay, well, those successful economies that have capitalised on the growth of digital, what kind of resources have they got, and how have they invested in their people and the talent and their businesses? There's a lot of learnings there, and I think there's probably quite a significant gap between those very successful economies and I guess where we are in Lancashire. But the opportunity is there, if we can divert the resources in very specific chosen areas, then there's nothing but success. You know, it'd be difficult not to be successful.
And it's very easy to make decisions about things like saying, oh, well, there isn't a demand for this, there isn't a demand for that. And yet, built Fraser House, the office spaces are full. Built Health Innovation Campus at Lancaster University, all the offices are full in a pandemic. You know, build it and they will come. Let's create those spaces that we can all work in as well, because they're as important as anything else. Funding wise, I agree with you. I mean, in terms of things like, local authorities need to better connect and understand their own markets. It's not just about funding. They can come and actually talk and engage, and it's that kind of thing that we need to get those decision makers and policy decision makers to come out and meet our businesses and see what's going on and taking place and how do they can learn from that. But they do need some funding as well. Yeah.
And I mean, just to go into a bit more specifics on that, I mean, I think you both know I'm a massive fan of action over talking about it too much. And I guess, if we're having this conversation in 5 years' time, like what you've touched on a few things there, and obviously it's a collective decision, and we know lots of different people who feed into these thoughts. But individually, what are are there a couple of key things you would love to have seen happen in 5 years' time that you'd love to say, that was one of the things that shifted the dial?
Yeah, I mean, I go on about this all the time. So, but I've been over to Limerick, and I've seen Waterloo in Canada, and I've seen what they've done. And what I've seen there is people, not just a tech sector, and not just a group of people who are connected to that, working together, but the whole economic decision makers. So, property development, all helping the digital sector, the university sector, saying we're going to develop spin-outs and we're going to find places for them. The pension funds of the local authorities. So in Canada, they put something like it's a few percent, but it's a really, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, which they pump into the local and small businesses locally and invest in those businesses. It just doesn't happen in the UK. It doesn't happen at the scale it should do. And actually, genuinely, we should all be working together, but not just the digital sector, but outside of that as well, all the influences that can actually shape and improve our economy. Because if those kind of resources and those kind of money were put in the right place, we could all benefit from it. So in 5 years' time, really, I'd love to see places like Lancaster with more space like this, more companies growing, but also upskilling and developing the skills, working with young people, where our local authority says, I'm going to put money into supporting the development of digital skills because I know that it will be to the benefit of young people. And at the moment, that just doesn't happen enough. And we can do so much more out of the digital sector to help our economy on a wider basis.
Yeah, similar to actually, or three, if I may. So first, you may remember when we first got involved in creating the digital strategy, I shared a paper with you, which were my sort of scribbles. And on there were three things, and I don't think they've changed much. So first of all was the inward investment, attracting large employers to come into the region. So I think we can tick one of those off with Cyberforce, but I think we probably need two or three. And that's Team Lancashire, and to pull off Cyberforce to come into Lancashire was phenomenal. And what we've proven we can do it, and we can do it over and over again. So that was number one. Number two was to drive up the number of startups in the sector. And startups and scale-ups. So existing businesses that have the potential to scale up, let's equip them with the right skills, funding. So Michael, for example, has grown businesses, sold them, start up again, grow it, and see where that takes. But it takes a skill, and that knowledge doesn't just come like that. So we probably need mentors to work with the scale-ups, and people who've been there and done it before, like Michael, to guide and advise, which is slightly different to Boost, which it's a different proposition altogether. So those scale-ups, and then we're going back to the startups. You say, okay, we're not just talking about 5-10 startups a year. If we're bold and ambitious and say we can do, let's say in 5 years, say 500 businesses That's only 100 a year. Now, if you put the collective brains together and the local authorities and the private sector businesses who are actually quite willing to put money on the table to help grow and grow maybe they want equity, whatever. But I actually don't think funding is the major stumbling block. But we can pull the people together and say, okay, well, that's our goal. We want to set 500 new startups. Because I saw some research that says it takes 5,000 ideas to create 500 startups, which will give you 50 scale-ups, which will hopefully become one unicorn. And we want 1 or 2 unicorns in Lancashire. So we have to go through that process of building up the startup base. Yeah. So we're not there yet. There's quite a bit of work to do. But in my view, in 5 years' time, we've managed to achieve and get several hundred new digital startups. I think we've done our job.
Just to pick up on your one point about inward investment of companies, I think that's important, but I think we also need to look at inward investment of other things as well. So the inward investment of capital. So Cambridge gets £90 million of Innovate UK funding last year. Lancashire got 18 million, of which 9 million came to Lancaster. Wow. It shows that there are, that 5 times more money is just going to one small area, Cambridge. Yeah. Why can't we replicate that? How do we make those kind of things happen? How do we support grants and things? Then the other one is inward investment of talent. And actually having skilled people who've done things and experienced things who want to move to Lancashire, we know how brilliant the place is to live. Why can't we attract more of that talent? And COVID has helped that. So there's a lot of people living in London who've gone, I don't want to be living in this 2-bed apartment, and maybe I can go and live in a castle in Lancaster possibly not quite the same anymore. But on the edge of the Lake District, and get great schooling and all those kind of things. And so we've seen some amazing talent come here. The team at Liner Energy, for example, are pretty much all from outside of the county and have all moved here to support, enable and grow that business. That inward investment of talent will help create companies and grow companies, but they'll also have their earning potential, and then when they go and spend that money, they spend it on our local economy, and that grows the wider economy as well. So it's really important that we focus on not just the companies coming in, but so much more as well.
That was my third point, which was the skills.
Yeah.
And again, I think what we have to do is start from the primary and secondary schools, and enthuse not just the students actually, but not just the pupils, but the teachers as well. Because if you can get the teachers enthused, that will make sure that the students are enthused. But if you start at primary school and work up to secondary and then on to your colleges and eventually to university, that's at least a 10-year journey, if not more. And I think if we can again start there, and I know Kerry's doing a great job.
I was going to say, I think we're very lucky that I think we were the first digital skills partnership in the country that DCMS funded, and she's won awards for Kerry Harrison for the work.
That bid as well. It was great to be part of it, doing that persuasion exercise. I think we put a hell of a good proposition forward for them, which was quite exciting.
But we can then roll that out to all our schools, because one of the other things, if you think about the makeup of Lancashire, diversity is an issue, and I don't just mean diverse in terms of male, female, colour, creed, or whatever. But there are a lot of, particularly in where I come from in Blackburn, a lot of what you might call disadvantaged. Yeah. And I'm talking about disadvantaged white population who maybe is suffering from generations of unemployment. And I saw a statistic the other day where it was 25% of the working population in some parts of our county, are in that category. If we can energise those, then we'll have a high economy, a high worth workforce. Yeah. So there's work to do at lots of different levels, but I think we can start right at the basics, start at primary school and get them enthused into what the world of tech and digital is all about. Then in 10 years' time, the economy will be in different shape.
And like you say, it's just there's so much potential there and lots of easy wins, and we've just got to sort of get better at doing it. Just for a moment, I'll just pause and say, if anyone does have any questions, we've got a couple coming in, but I could keep talking to you and picking your brains all day. I've got loads more questions to ask you, but if anyone does have any questions, do pop them into the Q&A, and I'll pick those up in a minute. Just before I do that though, just going back to your own kind of businesses, you were talking there about mentors and learning and sharing that. What would you say has been one of your biggest challenges, and kind of what's your biggest lesson been from that, just in your experience over the years?
Yeah, knowing that you actually don't know everything. You know, so when you're an entrepreneur, you're a wheeler and dealer from time to time, or certainly in our online retail business, there is a lot of wheeling and dealing and buying product and flogging it. You know, that's what it's about. But when you're trying to build a business, that's a slightly different proposition. And when you're building your team up, building your revenues, building up your services, you get to a certain stage of growth, then you need help, you know, to take it to the next level. And sometimes, you know, that help is relatively easily available, but you can't just pick the phone up and speak to a support agency and this is what I'm looking for, because sometimes they don't get it. You know, so for me the challenge has been, one is finding the right talent to help me grow, and secondly for me personally to get the right kind of help and mentoring that Michael talked about to allow, you know, to help me scale up to the next level. So, and you don't know what you don't know.
And do you have what's been the best way that you've found, particularly for your own, you talk about your own mentorship and kind of getting intel about how you best run your business. What's the kind of the best way you've found to do that?
Do you know what, a live example now, it's not what you might think, oh, you know, pick the phone up and speak to a support agency. You know, it's networking, it's meeting people. You know, we've had conversations on the phone. You know, how do you do this, or how did you get to this? And quite recently, I came across. You know, I sort of attended a virtual seminar. It was actually, and got to meet a group of guys who specialise in this kind of field, and we're probably going to be signing them up. And you know. And it's not cheap, it's extremely expensive actually, but it's an investment. There may be other ways of doing it, but this is one way. It's just by networking and meeting people.
And I think it's really interesting because it talks something that, so Dan Prince was on from Lancaster University, was on a panel earlier, and he was sort of talking about innovation in general, and that ultimately the bottom line with innovation is just it's getting new ideas, and it's, you know, it doesn't matter where you get them from, but it's not necessarily sort of tailored support or sort of anything specific. It's just about allowing yourself to have those new ideas and exploring them, which is, I guess, the point of everything we're trying to do here in sharing those ideas. Michael, what's the biggest challenge?
We've got to talk about that all day. One of them is just simply the challenge of failure. You know, if you constantly think you're going to fail, or you're worried about failing, then you won't do it. You know, failing is a fundamental part of owning your own business. If you've not failed, it's very difficult to know what you do to get it right sometimes. And often they say, you know, it's not how far you fall, it's how high you bounce. Yeah. And I think those things are really important. And I think empowering your people, I think, is an extraordinary thing. Finding the right people, giving them the skills, helping them, supporting them, and empowering them. So, you know, our as an organisation, we don't have fixed working hours, we don't have fixed sick pay or anything like that. We just, you know, you contribute to the organisation. Our thing is to achieve deadlines. We've got to achieve certain things. So we set out sprints, and we know we've got to do them. And the team work together to support each other to get that done. So if they want to go to the doctors in the middle of the day, they go. They don't need to tell us. You know, we're all grown adults. We all, you know, and we want to treat them like grown adults, not kids. And too many organisations just treat their staff really poorly. One thing for me, I've always had a really good finance director. It's been probably the most important element of what we do. We've got a fantastic one in Martin Peters at the moment. But I go back to Uday Patel, who used to work with in the 90s. And Uday was one of the key factors in that organisation. And he was just somebody I could just trust to run the finance side of the business and report on where we needed to be and what we need to do. Go on forever. But I mean, you know, there's so many little parts of that. Courses and training, it's got to be right for you. It's got to fit around your time. People, you know, have an expectation that you'll do all these kind of things. I did the lead program at Lancaster University when I was in a position where the business could manage itself during the day when I was out. And the lead program was absolutely fantastic. And if something like that ever comes around again, you know, people should take up the opportunity. But there's so much out there, and it's very difficult to absorb. Thankfully, I've got a bit of a sponge of a brain. So, you know, I get a ton of newsletters. They all come in early in the morning. I absorb what I want to do, take it away, digest it, and then hopefully at some point or another use it to the benefit of the business or otherwise. But you've got to be going out, you've got to be talking to people, you've got to be signing up for these things, you've got to be aware of what's out there. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to go and grab it before you do.
Brilliant. I think those are some very, very good tips for any business owners out there. So just going...
I was going to say something Michael said, you don't really hear in these kind of fireside chats and stuff, and it's about failure, you know, and you know, both of us could probably write a list of, you know, things that we've tried and failed, you know, and that is so important, because you know, generally in films and books, all you hear is a positive. But I guarantee you, every successful business person will have a string of failures, you know, within their experiences, and it's that also is great training ground.
And there's something to be said for, I guess, that, because we have a lot of that sort of survivor bias in a lot of the stories that are told, but actually it depends whether in Lancashire we can be brave enough to share the difficult stories in order to learn from them. So we have got a couple of really great questions coming through, actually. So first one here is actually around collaboration. So how do we get digital businesses across the county to collaborate on opportunities? I think you both had some experience of that. So yeah, just any kind of key thoughts on that?
Well, the one thing that is for stimulus is that the government, particularly around innovation funding, want collaboration as the starting point. So if you're involved in, you're looking for opportunities, and there's the opportunity to work on something, you see a bid that requires that kind of thing, then reach out and get the expertise. So and it's amazing where it comes from. So we've got really good connections with TRL, what used to be the Transport Research Laboratory in London. They reached out to us because they had an opportunity, and now we're working with them, Honda and Galliford Try, on a huge HGV electric vehicle charging project. You know, that was fantastic for us, but it needed that kind of engagement with other organisations that fit around your industry, because if you're not talking to the right people, those things are never going to present themselves to you. And again, most of the kind of leads and information that we get come from that collaboration with other partner businesses. So if you're not talking to them, then you're not going to get that opportunity. And
how do you start that conversation? Is it just networking again?
Just having the front to go and start these kind of things. You know, sometimes you may not even have the idea fully developed, but at least put that proposition.
Go and have
somebody.
a natter with someone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And in some cases, you're presenting something to them exactly what they need, or they're looking for an opportunity. You know, engage with Lancaster University. Lancaster University, the team at InfoLab, for example. There's an amazing business economic development team there. They can work with you. They'll know people across the university. They'll know plenty of people outside the university. So they'll turn around and go, "We've heard about this amazing project in blah blah. Do you want the details? Do you want this name?" It's those kind of things that can really help you. And there are just some really good people around. So there's a guy called Billy, I think his name is, at UCLan, and he's been around there like for 40 years, and everybody knows him. And he's one of these people who just, again, is a sponge, and he just says, "You should speak to this," or there'll be a call every now and again, and he'll connect people up, you know. And there's just people like that, and you'll find them. But work hard at it, you know. Things aren't going to come to you. You've got to reach out. You've got to make the effort.
Definitely.
Agreed, Michael. I mean, there are different, you know, stages of collaboration. So, what Michael talked about is potential opportunities for your business, and you know, creating new opportunities through collaboration with people who can add value to what you're doing. Then you've got the other you know, end of the spectrum, where you're talking about, you know, clusters of people in the same kind of business, where and that's often support agency driven, where you may have let's say an e-commerce cluster, where if in a particular area they've got lots of people involved in e-commerce, either selling or marketing, or involved somewhere in the chain, or fulfillment for that matter, then you know, you could actually have a cluster that sort of around a specific niche, and people learn from each other rather than necessarily go into business with each other. So there are different levels, and then you've got places like this, and clearly there will be collaboration just by being in the same place. But I think that is probably one of the action, you know, points, you know, for us in Lancashire, to create more of those opportunities. Yeah. I think in Lancaster you've got the Electech, which is...
Yeah, we just had a panel earlier today on there,
Yeah, because you've got a group of businesses that thought, do you know what, we're going to do this ourselves, and get together and work together and create their own little cluster.
Yeah, and look what's come to them, you know, there's people talking about the Electech cluster all over the county and further afield. I keep going on things that it keeps being mentioned. But they're not much different to what
they've been around for a long time. And
no,
they've
just tried
put
it.
a name on it. Yeah.
They've tried it. They put a name on it. They work hard to do it and everything else. But the e-commerce companies in East Lancashire could all come together, and suddenly, you know, we've got a cluster that other people are talking about.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
we've got the clean tech cluster in Lancaster. If those companies got together, the marketing cluster in Lancaster, which is about 15, 20 agencies, if they put their competitiveness aside and say issues about skills, space, infrastructure, all these kind of things that are beneficial to all of them, they just put that kind of competitive element aside for a minute, got together and said, hey, look, flag, you know, look at how brilliant we are over here. They might find that collectively they get far more inquiries and far more work, because people go, well, if you want to do digital marketing, come to Lancaster, and I'll find the one that maybe works for me. You know, and it's these kind of things that help shine a light on it. But again, people have got to make the effort to reach out to competitors or you know, collaborative companies who can benefit each other.
And I guess that's a good challenge to any digital business in Lancashire is, you know, do go and start finding those sort of collaborators and those people around you and start maybe building up those clusters. That's one step and one thing we can do next. Just sort of bringing it a bit back up to kind of the national agenda again. Someone's talked about sort of levelling up. Obviously, we're expecting lots of announcements around that this week probably. What do you think is kind of, how can Lancashire work with central government, and what's the real proposition there to central government about, you know, how we can support the levelling up agenda from Lancashire?
Go back to this report. You know, there's a good start in terms of the digital economy, but there's already, you know, work going on, you know, in terms of levelling up agenda. You know, the people in the positions of decision making are already, you know, working on numerous. I'd say numerous probably a bit strong, but opportunities, and you know, clearly we have a number of MPs, you know, from both sides of the house who are all wanting to level up, so to speak. So I think that, you know, it's probably fair to say that work's already being done in that area. You know, without sort of labouring the point, but today's announcement of £5 billion, it's a game changer. You get 2 or 3 like that, and Lancashire will be a completely different county to what it is now. But it, you know, I think the people in positions of power and responsibility are aware of, you know, the need to sort of keep pushing and banging the Lancashire drum. You know, the Secretary of State for Defence, Stan Wallace, you know, he's from from Preston, and clearly, you know, he must have worked hard to ensure that Cyberforce, you know, ended up in the heart of Lancashire. So I think that, you know, a number of members of Parliament are doing it.
I think it was really interesting also, you touched on earlier about, you know, some of the kind of the levels of sort of inequalities, socioeconomic inequalities and well-being in the county, and I know that that's often been discussed as actually quite an opportunity as well in terms of levelling up, you know, so while we've got capabilities to support, we also have a lot of opportunities to really test that out in some of our inequalities here and really make the most of that, which is, I think,
absolutely. And I would say it's, you know, it's also down to each region or each district to say, okay, you know, announcement number 1 today, maybe 2, 3, you know, further down the track. How do we as a district capitalise on that to make sure that our citizens, you know, are benefit from this, and that is then down to the decision makers with it at a district level, and maybe, you know, at a strategic level, maybe there's additional support required because, you know, historically, if you think about Lancashire, it's all been manufacturing, and it's still a huge part of our economy. So, but then came along the advanced manufacturing, and then came the Aerospace Alliance, which is the cluster for that advanced manufacturing group. And so things were driven from a strategic level, and I think maybe it's early doors yet, but, you know, we just need to think through the strategy and what the action plans are to make sure that the whole community benefits and not just, you know, specific parts of it.
Definitely.
I try desperately to keep my politics out of business because I'm quite of a political persuasion, but I won't touch on that. The things I would say about government is we need some things can be seen as panaceas, and, you know, putting the National Cyber Force here, it could have gone somewhere else in the country. and that area would have been shouting about it. What we want is long-term considered policy and considered action. So in terms of Lancashire is behind because it has two-tier authorities. Unitary authorities typically do better at making decisions because they can consolidate their resource better for an area. We need clear action on what those look like, and then we can get on with some of the work, because it doesn't work having multiple strands of economic development tiers and they don't necessarily engage the way they probably could. The issues about long-term poverty, and particularly in places like Blackpool, which is one of the poorest parts of the country, and in many other communities and areas of this thing, we can't change those things overnight. And putting in a short-term policy that just addresses that for a short while will not do what we need it to do. You know, I'm really lucky. My 14-year-old boy sits in his bedroom, he's got a great computer, he's got great internet connectivity, but there are kids all over this county who don't have any of that. And that means they can't learn, they can't improve, they can't do the things that kids in London and the South East, which by and large are more wealthy communities, can benefit from. We have to change that. And if you're talking about genuine levelling up, we need to bring people, give them the wealth and the prosperity and the support that they need to be able to do those things, because without it, we're not going to get a balanced economy across the country, because if you're not investing in those people and the talent that we've got, then you're never going to get where we need to be.
Thank you. It's a good, powerful statement to sort of almost wrap up on, I think, in terms of how we have a vision of changing things in Lancashire using the digital sector. So we are talking about the digital economy today, so I just want to finish on one final question to you, which is more about sort of digital and technology world in general. Obviously, you guys have been in that world for a long, long time, and I presume you're in it to some extent because you love it, you love sort of technology innovations, you love the development. So simple question is, what is your favourite technology or invention, either that has come in the past or that is, you know, that you can see evolving now, that you just absolutely love and just as always, gets you excited and you just think is just brilliant?
I can give you past and the future.
Right.
So the past, for many years I actually had a smartphone way before the iPhone. It was the Nokia communicator. It was like a brick, but
Yeah.
I had the smaller brick, so it wasn't too bad. But amazing invention, and it wasn't, so Nokia, a Swedish company, was probably designed by engineers. The Apple iPhone was designed by creatives, and so I wish I had designed that. I wouldn't be here then.
Yeah.
But as far as the future, one of the things that excites me most, and particularly for Lancashire, is future mobility. When you look at what, the strengths that we've got in the aerospace sector, and when you think about future mobility, I can imagine the time when from the car park in Fraser House will have a flying taxi taking me to Samlesbury and then on to Blackburn. And that's not science fiction. It's not that far around the corner, and I think Lancashire can play a huge role in that.
Definitely. And just to plug, we do have a session on future mobility coming up later in the week, so do check that out, because we've got some great cluster work happening around that already.
My colleague Will Maiden as well,
There
so
you go.
even more reason.
My feelings?
I think as human beings, we're not particularly good at doing things around technology. We're very clever at making things, but actually we've used them in some good ways, but in many very bad ways, because we're in a situation where we've got a continuing situation where we're fundamentally destroying the very world that we live in, and we've got very, very short time to resolve that. So at the moment, the things that really make passionate about is clean tech, and anything that resolves decarbonisation. And obviously, we're committed to doing that, and I see what happens in electric vehicles. But then electric vehicles in the same way are, arguably only for the wealthy at the moment. There's those people who can afford it. And we need to do way more as an economy to get as industry to not just think about how we can do gadgets and things that help the wealthiest and everything else, that we've got to support everybody to have the same level of opportunity, and at the same time enable us to have a future for our for the citizens around us. Constantly inventing clever stuff is not necessarily the answer to our problems. Let's work a way to actually solve some of the problems that we have in our society and keep improving them. And there is a lot of very clever stuff that people can benefit from that will also have a huge impact on our personal, economic, and the well-being of the rest of the country and the planet.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both. That's been an absolutely brilliant discussion and some really nice notes to finish on, I think. Today and the rest of the week is all about discussing innovation in Lancashire and how we can kind of really grow that, what we want to do next, and how we build that story. I think some of the stuff we've touched on today is really heartening to think about how we can do it differently in Lancashire and how we can really kind of make the impact of both the digital sector and innovation in general really have a broader impact on the whole of society, which is a wonderful note to finish on. So I think we'll leave it there. Had a great discussion. Thanks so much for everyone who's been joining. Thanks for your questions and for listening. We will be here for the rest of the week at Lancashire Innovation Festival. Lots of sessions to catch up on, and all of these will be available on Catch Up as well to listen to afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.